What's up, everybody? Brady Figuel here, coming at you with a review for the new All That Remains record, Antifragile, that was released this past Friday, January 31st. Firstly, anybody who already subscribes to my channel or has seen my videos will see that this is a new format for my videos. I've finally figured out a way to record how I want to record, which is just way easier than I've recorded in the past, and still manage to have the horizontal format rather than the fit your phone format that I've had so far. And with this format, I'll also be able to upload videos longer than 10 minutes because the app I record my reviews on only would allow me to get 10 minutes in. So now I can record as much as I want. And I'm very happy about that because I definitely will have a lot to say about this new album. All That Remains were such an important band as far as me developing as a metalhead. This is their first album in just over 6 years as well, and it's following up 2018's Victim of the New Disease, which in my opinion is one of their best albums. Although I also am a big fan of pretty much everything from This Darkened Heart up until 2010's For We Are Many. But that being said, I was still a little nervous going into this album just because they have also had a few albums that, let's just say, weren't that great. There was 2012's A War You Cannot Win, which was okay, but kind of just watered down their sound a little bit. Then you had 2015's The Order of Things, which in my opinion was just an absolute disaster. And 2017's Madness, which was maybe a little bit better, but just saw them going too far down just this radio rock rabbit hole for me, which was just a little bit bland for my taste. So the band takes 6 years off, of course, after the tragic death of lead guitarist Ollie Herbert, who is one of the most underrated lead guitar players in this generation period. Rest in peace, Ollie. And this album is also following up the departure of key drummer Jason Costa, who was one of my biggest inspirations as a drummer. It always fascinated me just how great of a metal drummer he was, despite using the traditional drum grip. So 6 years off, new lineup, I really had no idea what to expect going into this album. And the singles leading up to the album kind of didn't really help with that, if I'm being honest. The one single out of the four that were released that really hooked me was the second single, Let You Go. It was one of my very favorite songs of the year last year. Despite the somewhat mixed to negative initial reaction I gave the song when I did that reaction video to it. Once I read the lyrics and spent more time with the song, it grew on me so fast. I'll be honest though, the other singles didn't really do it for me. Divine, the first single, had some cool moments in it, but it really bothered me just how flat that chorus sounded compared to the rest of the song. I just feel like every time that chorus hit, the energy that was built up in the verses and the surrounding music just kind of tapered off. And because of that, the song felt a bit stop-start and, as a result, a bit jostling. The third single, No Tomorrow, had that cool, bouncy intro guitar lick and more of like an atmospheric quality to it, which I enjoyed, but for the most part, that song just felt really uninspired. And the fourth and final single, Forever Cold, although it clearly was a lot more inspired, especially lyrically, had just some musical moments that felt a bit underwhelming to me. I'll elaborate on all of those songs, but this record, I just wasn't sure what to expect. And that being said, I was a bit pleasantly surprised when I listened to the whole record and saw that pretty much aside from the singles, every single song on here is pretty fucking heavy and a throwback to their original melodic metalcore sound. As a longtime fan of this band, and I'm sure any hardcore All That Remains fans will agree with me on this, it was very refreshing to see them pretty much wholeheartedly go back to their metalcore roots. Because we really haven't seen them do that since 2010's For We Are Many, which is now 15 years ago. Like seriously, aside from No Tomorrow, which is the most radio-friendly song on here by far, like there's no cheesy radio rock ballads. There's lots of grit and urgency behind these songs. And not every song on here completely, blatantly centers around being radio-friendly. Most notably, one of my favorite tracks on this record, and one of my favorite All That Remains songs of the last decade and a half easily, Cut Their Tongues Out. That song just absolutely crushes. It's mean, it's vicious. It reminds me a lot of Fuck Love off of their most recent album, Victim of the New Disease. So huge props to All That Remains on this front for actually keeping some of the aggression and the urgency for the deep cuts of the album. However, as a result of them going back to this signature sound, there's kind of a double-edged sword on that front because the album does feel a little bit safe and a little bit predictable at times. And at its worst, it borders on derivative and even recycled. Like on Divine, those guitar licks in the bridge very much were a throwback to Not Alone off of Fall of Ideals. Although in this case it was cool as I it came off more as like a tribute to Ollie, and I could really appreciate that. But then Phil's vocal cadences in that bridge are pretty much identical to the ones in the bridge of This Calling. The track Poison, it's one of my favorite songs on here, but those like palm-muted tremolo riffs immediately brought Weak Willed to mind, also off of Fall of Ideals. And the recycling doesn't end there, as not only do they recycle some of their own parts from their albums in the past, but they do it to their peers as well. Like, that intro riff on the Piper had me laughing because of just... To put it in the simplest terms, it is the newest addition to the long list of songs that is blatantly ripped off Architect's Doomsday. That song overall is one of the more skippable tracks on here, although I do really like Jason's solo in the bridge when those harmonies kick in. It literally sounds like Ollie is playing that. But the verses have kind of like that forced clean singing over the heavy parts that was very prominent on Order of Things. And there's also those unnecessary added production and sound effects that was very present on Madness, especially in the intro of that song. The title track is one of my favorite songs on here, but that bridge section, again, like... Right at the 2:37 mark, I just looked at the timestamp for it because it stuck out to me so much. That chord progression, you can't tell me that doesn't sound identical to the chord progression also in the bridge of Bullet for My Valentine's, Tears Don't Fall. And just to be clear here, I'm not saying that these parts are copied or plagiarized, but it's so like recycled is the best term I can use for it. And again, it does make the overall music on this album feel a little bit uninspired. So as you can see, there were parts like that on this album that definitely really bothered me, but for the most part, I'd say it's pretty balanced out with other parts that I find to be pretty killer and a bit of a throwback to All That Remains' glory days, if you would call them that. The harmonized riffing in Poison It in the title track and the overall urgent energy of the tracks very much sounds like old All That Remains in a good way. I've already been very, very complimentary about Let You Go, the second single. What I love about this song probably the most is just how it so effortlessly walks that fine line between being a full-on metal song, but also being pretty accessible and radio-friendly. Like, this song has the screams and the double bass grooves and the sweep picking in the solo. But it also mostly utilizes clean vocals in a way that's very comfortable over the heavy music, which, by the way, is a great vocal performance from Phil. I especially love his vocals in the second verse of this song. They just sound so dramatic. And when he belts Let You Go at that final stanza in every chorus, that is just so powerful. This is also one of my favorite tracks lyrically on this record, as they kind of harken back to the lyrical themes on Victim of the New Disease, and he even goes to say 7 years since his divorce, obviously, which is what this song is about. Cut Their Tongues Out, again, is one of my favorite tracks on here. It's just so vicious and uses a lot more of those almost deathcore-esque breakdown sections. One of my favorite riffs on the album is near the end of the song when you get more of those added mean melodies thrown into that familiar riff at that point. Poison It is another huge highlight on this album for me. Even though those tremolo riffs do feel a little bit familiar, the song overall is again just real mean sounding, has a great energy in it. And I'll say the same thing about the closing track on here, Blood and Stone. Again, after you get past that ambient intro, which is going to be a criticism I have later, and those harmonized guitar leads kick in, that's just so Ollie Herbert in the best way possible. So really props to Jason Richardson on paying wholehearted tribute to Ollie on this album. I really respect that. And that's not to say that his parts are derivative in any way at all. His performance on this album is unbelievable. These solos are some of the most memorable parts on these songs. Divine, The Piper, Let You Go, the title track, all these songs have phenomenal solos and are probably my favorite ones on the album. And I also have to compliment the performance of new drummer on here, Anthony Barone, who absolutely kills it as well. Some of his grooves on here are so just technical, but also urgent and vicious and extreme at the same time. He very much brings the lightning fast and loud double bass drums and the blast beats and the very technical fills that would be very familiar to All That Remains fans already. And again, in a good way, not in a way that sounds derivative at all. And bassist Matt Dice even has a few shining moments on here. I like on Cut Their Tongues Out when the guitars drop out in that second verse and you get the bass really pushing that meanness and that aggression forward. And now getting into the production, this is something that worried me from the singles because there were a few moments in the singles that sounded a bit sonically weak. And unfortunately that does happen on a few more moments on this album. And a lot of it has to do with the overall really clean and digitized guitar tone. I find that a lot of these riffs just don't really hit as hard as they should just because of how pristine they sound. As far as specific moments on the album that exhibit that, the verses on Forever Cold, when you get those open chords being played and those gallops, those bass drum gallops, just listen to how weak those guitars sound. They sound so unassuming behind Phil's really vicious vocal performance in the verses of that song. That first breakdown after the second chorus on Let You Go is another really good example of that. Also, the clean chorus of the song Kerosene just doesn't really hit as hard as it should. And especially that real mean riff that comes in on the title track. It kicks in at like the 156 mark, and I love that riff. It sounds mean. It's got that awesome element of dissonance to it, but that part should just crush way harder than it does. These parts just sound way too thin and way too underwhelming. But I mean, the rest of the band sounds pretty good production-wise. I mean, the bass drum, very familiar. All That Remains territory here, as it's always very loud and pushed to the forefront, but the kicks do sound pretty muscular and not as clicky as they did on, let's say, Madness. And Phil's vocals, too, like the layering that's on display here, whether it's his gruff vocals on Cut Their Tongues Out or Poison It, or his cleans, again, in those kind of final stanzas of Forever Cold and Let You Go, his vocals do sound really full and satisfying. I just wish the guitar tone was a little bit grittier and less pristine sounding. I think it would have done this album pretty good justice. Overall, though, if you're a longtime fan and a hardcore fan of this band, there's a lot to love on here. Maybe a little bit safe, maybe a little bit paint by numbers and familiar, but that doesn't really equate to bad. There wasn't really any songs on here that I thought were bad. Even songs that I'm finding myself skipping, like No Tomorrow and The Piper, I could still at least get through them. I did forget to mention, though, the closing track, Blood and Stone, although I do like the overall song, I don't really think it needs that like dramatic piano intro. I think it'd be a lot better of a song if it just cut right to the harmonized leads. But again, still an enjoyable track. So yeah, maybe it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but overall, I'm so happy for All That Remains, and I'm really happy for their fans. It's been really fun hearing them go back to their roots, and as a result, I'm enjoying the album just because of that. This album gets an 18 out of 30 for me. As always, thank you guys very much for watching. Please make sure to comment your thoughts on this album below. I love to hear them. I love to discuss them. Check the description of the video for my Instagram, Spotify, and Threads links. And hit the subscribe button for more rock, metal-related content, album reviews. And until next time, I'll see you guys later.